Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the old box office. So I did a year in review earlier this week. Sorry, it was kind of a longer episode. I went a lot of rants. But I feel like if you're talking about the whole year, you just got to go all in and sort of get it all out. It was very therapeutic for me. In any event, I'm gonna do a 2-for-1 episode today. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what happened last weekend at the box office. Try and make it a little bit quicker than normal, and then I'm gonna do some projections for the upcoming weekend, which is technically starting tonight as the previews start for Underworld. And I guess Hidden Figures has already been out. The big wide release open this weekend that's brand new is Underworld. Underworld 5, I think? Cinco? Who knows? In any event, let's talk about last weekend really quickly and just sort of give it an old review here. So this would have been the New Year's Eve weekend, December 30th through January 1st. Now, a lot of people have this listed as a 4-day weekend. I work freelance, so I don't really have normal holidays. But I guess everybody was off on Monday. But I was going to talk about the 3-day because it gives us a better sort of context because we can compare it to other weekends as opposed to 4-day weekends. When you're talking about per theater averages, it's always like a lot higher and you're not really sure why. And there's not really the context to compare it to. So we're going to talk about the 3-day instead of the 4-day weekend. Number one this weekend was Rogue One, obviously. Did about $41.6 million. Great 22% drop. That makes sense just because the holidays are really weird. And it's just not going to have normal drops like in the 40s and 50%. But Rogue One's doing fantastic legs wise. I've talked about it a lot in the show. It currently sits at $424 million. That's not the latest. That was through last weekend. It's obviously going to break over 500 million. I think a lot of people were concerned that it may not break that barrier. That was sort of like going to be the flop zone. That's not going to happen with this. Rogue One's going to crush it. It is crushing it. It really made up for that lower 155 opening, and it's just sort of may end up with like a 3.5x multiplier or something like that. So great performance by Rogue One. Number two last weekend was Sing, $42.9 million. Actually 21% jump on that one. It's now sits at 166. This one's really, I feel like it opened a little bit lower than people thought, but like Rogue One, with the holidays and those legs and the multiplier, it's going to end up doing quite well for itself. Number three, kind of surprisingly, and I think in a past episode I might have ditched this one, Passengers has opened with, in its second weekend, did 16.1 million with about a 9% increase. This one is surprising for a couple of reasons. It opened really low, and it seemed like it was going to be a pretty fantastic flop, like just a massive, massive flop for the Jennifer Lawrence, Chris Pratt movie. I was all in on this film earlier this year, but for something happened with the production. The trailers were off. The marketing was weird. The story wasn't very clear. I actually went to go see it expecting it to be like this absolute disaster of a film. It's just kind of like a mediocre film. I don't think it's a huge disaster quality wise. It was fine. It was kind of enjoyable. It had a story that made sense. It wasn't certainly not a masterpiece or I wouldn't even call it great or even really good. It's sort of like an adequate blockbuster movie. But it's really turned around here with the holiday sort of extended audience here. Like people are going to see movies all the way through this week. It feels like at a sort of massive pace. So it's sort of picking up those audiences past the holiday. So it did 16.1 million this last weekend. It currently sits at $61 million. Like, okay, look, the budget was 110. Marketing had to be outrageous in the 40s, 50s, millions of dollars for just domestic. But it's not the massive flop that was indicated by its opening weekend. It's just not. Like, if this thing breaks $100 million, that's going to be okay. I think Sony's going to be like, okay, like breathe a sigh of relief on this. Like that it didn't end up at like $50 million because that looked like a distinct possibility a few weeks ago that like this was going to basically fall off a cliff and never recover. So I'm sure Sony's not overjoyed with how it's doing, but I think they're sort of I think they're feeling okay with it now. They're going to lose money on it. It's sort of like at this point, it's like, how much are we going to lose? Is it like $100 million loss or like maybe a $40 million loss? And I think they're going towards the lower end of that now as Passengers continues to do well a few weeks after it has opened. It's got good staying power. Number 4 was Moana. That's not going away anytime soon, apparently. $11 million. Added screens last weekend. What? I don't even know what's going on with that. It's at $210 million right now, which is pretty good in its 6th weekend. Talked about this one at length on the review. Decent performance by Moana. I think Disney wanted a little bit more out of it. Number 5 was Why Him? This is the James Franco, Bryan Cranston comedy. Released by Fox, did $10 million this last weekend, slight little 9% drop. It sits at $34.6 million so far. The overall read on that is, I think, what they probably expected, a little bit under what they had hoped for, but not a total huge flop, just sort of a decent performance there. Number 6 this last weekend was Fences, $10 million. It's sitting at about $30 million right now. I thought this one, this is its wide release. It was limited before. I didn't understand why they released it limited at all. Really confusing to me. It ended up doing about $4,000 per screen this weekend, which isn't terrible. That's a pretty decent wide expansion per theater average. Not bad. I felt like there was more potential for this film. I have no idea where it's going to end up at. It's sitting at about $30 million now. They're probably just keeping it in the theaters so that when the Oscar nominations come out in a couple of weeks, that'll get another bump. But I think they wanted more out of this. Paramount released it. I think they wanted a lot more out of it. And I think they were thinking at least $50-60 million for this film, and I don't think it's going to get there, unfortunately. In any event, number 7 was La La Land. This is the buzziest film of the season, I think, and I think it's going to get even more so once it gets nominated for Best Picture, which is almost a shoo-in right now, along with Best Actress and Actor nominations for Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. I've been like super gushing about this film for the last few months, and I got to see it on Christmas, and I don't know. I've mixed. I don't really want to get into the artistic criticism side of things too much. I kind of have mixed feelings about it, but I do think that I am an artistic snob, and I won't hide that. I studied this stuff for a long time, and I'm proud of that. And I'm a kind of a elitist when it comes to art. And I think that La La Land fell a little bit short for me personally, but I do feel like it is going to play incredibly well. Not just in Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, the big cultural centers. It's gonna play very well out in the middle of America, or sort of non-traditional art film places like Omaha, San Antonio, wherever, Denver, Milwaukee, Chicago. I think it's gonna play well in those cities, just because everybody who I've heard talk about this film, number 1, loves it, and number 2, it's the type of people that you wouldn't normally see. Who wouldn't normally see a movie like this? Who wouldn't have gone and see The Artist, the silent film that won Best Picture a few years ago? They're going out to see this film, and they're really loving it. And it's men and women. It's not just a female-only sort of audience here. Men are really liking this film, too. It came in at $9.5 million this last weekend. It's only on 750 screens. Its per theater average is over $10K still. It's at $12,000, almost $13,000 per theater. That is fantastic for the number of screens that it's on. Currently sitting at $34 million. I honestly think the sky is the limit for this film. I think they need to get it out there to as many theaters as possible. Because once those Oscar noms hits, this is going to be everywhere, and everybody's going to want to see it. And I think word of mouth is really hitting the point now where everybody knows about the film and everybody kind of wants to see it. But everybody, I mean, like 20% of the population, whatever. You know what I mean? In any event, so La La Land's doing great. Assassin's Creed, unfortunately, is a big bomb. Came in at $8.6 million last weekend, about a 15% drop from the weekend before. Its per theater average is sinking below the 3,000 mark at about $2,900. You compare that to La La Land sitting at about $34 million total. Assassin's Creed is sitting at about just $5 million more. Its budget was about 4x that of La La Land. The budget for Assassin's Creed was $125 million, while La La Land was only $30 million. So Assassin's Creed is a massive flop. Then I don't know what they were thinking with this film. I never really bought into it doing well. It's a huge video game series, but I think Warcraft over the summer proved to us that just because you make a movie that incorporates a really popular video game franchise, that doesn't mean it's going to do fantastic. And I think that Assassin's Creed is a perfect example of that. The film quality itself sucked. It was a bad movie. Everybody knows that. The critics agree. The viewers agree. It's not a good film. The marketing was awful. And this is what the end result is. Like, you can't just cash in because, millions of people have played the game. They're going to go see this movie. That's not how it works. You have to have a hook. You have to have a visual, a marketing language that hooks people and gets them in the door, even if they know what Assassin's Creed is all about. It just wasn't an exciting film at all. And a big flop for Fox there. Number 9 this last weekend was Manchester by the Sea. This is the Oscar buzz film. Casey Affleck's probably going to win Best Actor for it. It's definitely going to be nominated for Best Picture. It came in at about $4.2 million. It's still sitting at about 1,200 screens. It's losing a little bit of screens now. I think it's hit its peak in terms of saturation. Its per theater average is pretty good at $3,500. Keep in mind, it's in its 7th weekend now. They did a pretty interesting, slower ramp up to wide release, which I think was a good strategy. And now they hit sort of the cap on it. It's like, maybe we can keep it in there until it gets nominated for Best Picture and gets another bump. I think that's probably what they are going to do. Number 10 was Collateral Beauty, $4.1 million. Big flop for Will Smith, and every single famous person in the world was in it. $25 million total. Not good at all. Will Smith just needs to go in a different direction. I've talked about that a little bit before too. I thought Focus was a great movie. I guess last year. Was it this year or last year? Probably last year. Thought it was a great movie. I thought it was a great role for him. It did all right. I think he needs more roles like that. More adult roles that are kind of flashy though. Collateral Beauty just seemed like the visual Ambien. Like, why would you want to see this when I can just take a nap? So that's the top 10. Collateral Beauty rounding out the top 10. Stuff outside the top 10 that is maybe interesting. Lion did about $2.2 million. Its per theater was about $4,000. That's kind of a limited release art film that they want to play for the Oscars. Doesn't have the buzz, not going to get it. It may get a couple of reward or nominations. It's not going to win anything. Besides that, everything's pretty normal. Like Office Christmas Party is still sticking around in the top 12. Did about $51 million overall. That one's kind of surprising because it started out pretty slow, but it sort of stuck around there a little bit. Jackie did about $1.5 million. That's per theater average. Almost the exact identical per theater average as Lion. It's done about $7 million so far. Like Lion, it's an Oscar bait movie, and it just didn't click, I think, with a larger audience, so it's going to get kind of hidden. I think she will get a Best Actress nom for her role, Natalie Portman. And that might cause it to jump a little bit, but it's not going to be a huge success. So let's talk about what's opening up this weekend. The only really major new release is Underworld Blood Wars, which I believe is the 5th in this series. This is the Kate Beckinsale vehicle that's been around forever. The original opened up in 2003. Did $21 million on its opening, ended up with $51 million. This series has been unbelievably consistent. The sequel, Underworld Evolution, opened at $26 million, ended up at $62 million. Underworld Rise of the Lycans, because it's werewolves. I don't even know anything about this series. I think I've seen one of them. I'm pretty sure I saw the original Underworld, and I was like, "What? No, I don't like. This is stupid." It just seems so cheap, and it's Sony Gem, who just tends to make really weird kind of. They're like B movies, but like they give them enough money, so they're like not B movies, but they're always going to be a B movie, like no matter how much money they throw at it. Rise of the Lycans did $20 million back in 2009. Ended up at $45 million. Not good, but the most recent one did okay. Underworld Awakening came out in January of 2012, basically 5 years ago exactly. It's funny too, is they always open these Underworld movies in the first couple of weeks or in January. And that I don't wonder why they do that, because January is traditionally overall the worst box office month of the year, and it's usually not even very close. January and February and September are the 3 months, I believe, that are the worst, but January is absolutely the worst. So it's kind of a weird, barren wasteland for movies, and they tried to experiment and throw some interesting stuff out there, but a lot of it just doesn't stick because people are sort of recovering from the holidays. It's too cold outside to go anywhere. I know up where I'm from, Wisconsin, Minnesota area is just absolutely frigid. No one's going anywhere. So it's definitely a dumping ground. And I feel like, unfortunately, Underworld movies, especially this last one, Blood Wars, feels really just like, let's just throw it out there and see what happens. I don't think Blood Wars is going to do $26 million like the last few have done. I just don't see it happening, unfortunately. And I feel bad. I don't know. I feel bad for Kate Beckinsale just because she seems like she's a great actress. Like, she was in, I forget what it was called. I'll have to look it up real quick. She was in a great movie last year, Love and Friendship, that, I think won a few awards, but had a really, really sort of buzz about it on an artistic sense. It seemed like a very good art film. And she was praised for her acting in it. And she's had a very strange career. She's the type of person that she still is a very beautiful woman. And I know when you see her on Pearl Harbor, you're like, she's just gorgeous. And she still has, she's still, this has been like 16 years since Pearl Harbor came out. And she still looks wonderful. So she, unfortunately, what happens, and I think this happens a lot in Hollywood, is that a beautiful young woman tends to get typecast in certain roles, and they don't really allow them to act. They don't really allow these actresses to develop their art and craft. And there's this weird gully in their careers where, from, let's say, 18 to 30, they can play the young woman, but the moment they hit 30, 35, they no longer get cast in those young women roles. And a lot of actresses then just drop out because they can't get good work anymore. But if they can survive that gully and sort of come out the other end and sort of get roles that are for older women, like mothers and grandmothers and stuff like that, or even just more arty roles where they just don't want some young girl who looks like a cheerleader to be the lead, if they can get through that rough patch, and I think Kate Beckinsale has definitely done that now, especially with her role in Love and Friendship, where she's transitioning into a more artistic actress instead of just honestly in this eye candy, which is what she was cast as in a lot of these films. And unfortunately, I think the Underworld series is part of that. Like, the lead marketing part or aspect or element of the Underworld series is Kate Beckinsale in like black leather. That's the entire marketing campaign. And you know what? As a straight dude, yeah, you're gonna look at it. You're gonna be like, oh yeah, what's this? This seems interesting. But I think she's hopefully she's moving beyond that, but she's stuck with this Underworld film. I think this is the last one. In any event, let's talk numbers before I start going on more rants about bullshit. So Underworld's Blood Wars, you take a look at the past and you're looking like it's super consistent. These Underworld films open up in January. They open up around the mid-20s and end around $50 to $60 million. I don't think Underworld Blood Wars is going to do that well, just because the series is very tired. I don't even think Kate Beckinsale wanted to do this film, but she probably was under contract. So what the trades are saying for Underworld here is Variety saying $15 million. I think that's pretty accurate, maybe a little bit low. Box Office Pro is saying $13.5 million, and Deadline is saying low to mid-teens for Underworld Blood Wars. Hollywood Reporter didn't have a prediction. I think it's weird with the holidays. A lot of people aren't doing stuff. Like even Box Office Mojo didn't have a prediction for this film. So that gives us the ballpark. They're basically saying teens. Now, if we look at comparable films, obviously the last Underworld film opened at $25 million. Its per theater average was about $8,000. If Underworld Blood Wars does that on its 300 or 3,065 theaters, you're looking at a $25 million weekend for this new Underworld picture. I don't think that's going to happen. Last Witch Hunter seems like a comparable film to me. Opened at $10 million, had a per theater average of 3.5K. If Underworld did that, you're looking at $10.7 million. That seems low to me. It just doesn't seem, it seems like there's a built-in audience here that's going to go see this, which you didn't have with Last Witch Hunter. It just seems like this random fantasy action film. I think it's going to do better than that. Another one that comes to mind, comparable film, would be Dracula Untold. Opened at $23 million. Its per theater average was just about 8.1K. And just like the last Underworld Awakening, similar per theater average there. If this new Underworld does that, you're still looking at like $24 or $25 million. And a comparable that sort of came to mind just as like a January opening, the weekend after New Year's is just a really strange weekend to open a film. But The Forest did that last year. It opened up at $12 million for the weekend with a per theater average of 5.2K. If Underworld does that, you're looking at about $15.9 million. And that definitely feels a little bit more comfortable. So I'm going to say on the low end, Underworld Blood Wars will probably open on the low end with a per theater average of $4,000 per theater. That will put it at $12.2 million. That's my low end. High end, I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe people just are in love with Kate Beckinsale and they really want something new. I don't think this is going to happen, but I have to sort of consider it a $10,000 per theater average. That would be a $30.6 million opening. Again, I don't think that's going to happen, but I sort of got to throw it out there to give myself a range here. I think it's going to do about just a little bit. It's going to do below what Underworld Awakening did in Dracula Untold, below that 8K per theater average. But I think it's going to do a little bit above The Forest. The Forest seems like a more accurate comparable to me, just because it's more recent and it's in that exact time slot here. So I'm going to say, and that opened with a 5K per theater average. So I'm thinking a little bit closer to that than the 8K. So I'm going to say $6,000 per theater, which would put Underworld Blood Wars at $18.4 million for the weekend. So I'm a little bit higher than the projections from Variety, Box Office Pro, and Deadline. But it's got a built-in audience, and the numbers seem to make sense to me. The per theater averages that they're talking about are really low, and they're more closer to the Last Witch Hunter. I just don't see that. Like, Last Witch Hunter did not have this audience. Didn't have Kate Beckinsale and black leather. I mean, come on, guys. Anyway, so $6,000 per theater with an $18.4 million opening weekend for Underworld is my projection. The other movie that is going wide that I wanted to talk about briefly, there's a couple movies going wide. Lions opening up to 600 screens, and then Monster Calls is opening up at 1523. I don't have much to say about this film. They're kind of limited releases. They're going to do a few $1 million maybe if they're lucky. Monster Calls looks really good. I don't know why they released it this weekend. It feels like a really bad release schedule for that. I could see, it looks like a very well done film, very unique marketing. The trailer's fantastic. I would have liked, and plus you got Felicity Jones in there playing the mother, coming off of Rogue One here. She's a big name star now. So I just don't get releasing it this weekend. Here's what I would do if I was a studio. I'd find a nice quiet weekend in March and put it out then, and that way it can connect with people a little bit more. It seems like where the Wild Things are. It really seems like that movie version where it just the visuals were magical, the music was magical. It kind of has that feel, but it's going to get lost. I mean, it's so busy at the box office now with all these holiday holdovers, and then you got some new blood coming in here. I don't think a lot of people are going to see this. It'll probably do $2 million, $3 million this weekend. The other bigger film that I did want to talk about in depth a little bit more is Hidden Figures. This is about the African-American women who worked at NASA, which is a story I think most people have no concept of and had no idea actually happened. I certainly didn't. But the marketing campaign for this has been honestly outrageous. It's been everywhere. I've seen I've seen more commercials for this and more trailers for this than any other movie in the last 3 months, which it's kind of mind blowing when you think about it. But Fox is just doing the hard push on this, really, really hard push. And I guess they're thinking it's a good play for the Oscars, but even just throw out the Oscars. Like, it just looks like a really fascinating movie. You got Jim Parsons, Kevin Costner in there, Kristen Dunst are the more established actors. Octavia Spencer is a sort of a bigger name. And that's sort of, it doesn't seem like it should be a big movie. Even the cast is sort of like, oh, like they're sort of well known. But the hook here, and this makes me feel like it's the 90s all over again. The hook here is the story, and how interesting it is and how unique it is. It's the classic, here's an untold story about American history that we think is really fascinating, that you're going to love, and it looks very well produced. I'm super bullish on this film. And after seeing the weekend numbers, I really want to see it just on a personal level. But I think from a business perspective, it's PG, low budget of only $25 million. I think Fox is going to make money hand over fist on this. It had a quiet opening, only 25 theaters over Christmas. Decent per theater average for a limited opening. Now, if this was a New York, Los Angeles release and it was on 5 screens, it needs to do like over 100K per theater, and then I'd be like, all right, that makes sense. It only did 20K per theater on those 25 screens. But what's fascinating is this, and that was the Christmas weekend. This last weekend, and you almost never see this last weekend over New Year's Eve, it was still on 25 screens, so they didn't expand it at all. Its per theater average went up $14,000. I don't think I've seen that ever, at least since I've been looking at this stuff very in depth. It's very, very rare that you'll see a limited release like that not add any screens and have its per theater average bump up that much, well over 50%. So there's something going on with this film. Something is capturing audiences. Something is getting people into the theater and saying, people are seeing it on TV and they're like, I really got to see this. So we're talking an expansion here to 2,470 screens this weekend. It's got a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics love it. I think audiences are going to love it. I got to check the cinema score real quick on this. But I'm thinking, if I look at some similar films, and these are sort of like African-American films that played well to general audiences in America, you're looking at Selma, that opened at $11 million on its wide release, with a per theater average of $5,000. So if Hidden Figures can do that on its basically 2,500 screens, you're looking at an opening weekend here of opening wide weekend, I should say, of $12.6 million, which I think would be great for this movie. But I feel like it's kind of low because the buzz on this is so big. Butler is also another comparable movie, opened at $20 million. Its per theater average was $6,000. If Hidden Figures could do that, you're looking at about $14.8 million. Again, good, but I kind of feel like it's a little too low. It's too low. The other movie that comes to mind is The Help, which opened to $26 million on its wide release. I think it just started out wide, actually, Help. Butler and Selma started out limited, but The Help just opened wide immediately. Had a $10,000 per theater average. If Hidden Figures can do that, you're looking at about $25.2 million. That feels pretty comfortable. I think this is going to play very, very well. There's no cinema score for Hidden Figures yet. I guess because it hasn't gone wide. Weird. I'm gonna take a look at the Rotten Tomatoes score and see what we got in terms of the audience. In any event, so I think it's gonna be higher than Selma, higher than Butler. I think it's gonna be around the Help area here in terms of its per theater average. On the low end, I'm gonna say $5K per theater, $12.3 million. On the high end, I'm thinking like maybe even like a $11K per theater. That would put it at $27.2 million for the weekend. I'm thinking it's going to do a little bit underneath that. It doesn't have an audience score for on Rotten Tomatoes either. It's open. It's weird. It's got a decent numbers for the 1SC score, about 13,000 people. That's decent for what was considered to be a smaller film a month ago or 2 months ago, but it's blown up a bit. I'm gonna say it's gonna do 10K per theater, just around what The Help did. Even though The Help had that, obviously, the huge book audience, I think the buzz and hype on this is enough to put it in that realm. So I'm gonna say $10,000 per theater. That would put it at $24.7 million for the weekend. I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to see what it's going to do. Underworld, I mean, we'll see what it does. I think it's going to underperform a bit at about $18.4 million. And if Underworld does open below 20, that'll be the first time a movie in that series has opened under $20 million. They've all been, in the mid 20s. So, and I think that makes sense. Underworld no longer fits into our movie landscape anymore. It did 5-10 years ago. But now with the amazing stuff on Netflix and Amazon and the million different streaming options, and now like films, there's great films on VOD that you can get 2 months, 3 months after in the theater. There's just too much competition now for what, in all intents and purposes, is sort of like a weird horror fantasy trashy B movie. It's just that it doesn't have a place anymore at the theater, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know. I never liked the Underworld movies. So I'm saying 18.4 million for that. Hidden Figures, I'm going to say 24.7 million. I guess Rogue One's going to win again. It'll probably be Rogue One, Sing, and then Hidden Figures in number 3. But we will see next week. Thanks for listening, guys. I will be back next week with the weekend review, and then we will do some projections for the next weekend. All right, have a good one.